We're going to continue on and look at the different types of cells you can find in bone. Osteoprogenitor cells are stem cells found in the periosteum and endosteum that give rise to osteoblasts, and bone lining cells. Osteoblasts are bone-forming cells that secrete matrix, and they can mature into osteocytes that monitor and maintain the bone matrix. And bone lining cells are just flat cells found where bone remodeling is not going on. They can help the osteocytes. That also leaves osteoclasts, which are a little different from the rest of the bone cells. All but osteoclasts actually originate from mesenchymal embryonic tissue, whereas osteoclasts, they come from the hematopoietic stem cell, which is the same stem cell that we get red blood cells, other white blood cells, and platelets from. So most of the cells we find in bone come from the connective tissue mesenchymal stem cell, but not osteoclasts. They're different. So let's take a closer look at each one of these cells. Osteoprogenitor cells are also known as osteogenic cells, and they are mitotically active, so they can continue to produce more cells. And that mitotic activity occurs in the periosteum and endosteum, both the outside and inside lining of bone, respectively. We can actually stimulate them and see them differentiate into osteoblasts or bone lining cells. But of course, some remain osteoprogenitor cells. Osteoblasts are true blast cells making matrix and connective tissue. The prefix osteo means bone, and what osteoblasts form is called osteoid. It's an unmineralized bone matrix. It's mostly collagen and some calcium binding proteins. Actually, most of bone is not calcium. It's 90% bone protein, which is really just collagen. Osteoblasts are also actively mitotic and can perform mitosis to make more osteoblasts. Once the bone matrix is made, though, the osteoprogenitor cells, which can become osteoblasts, then become osteocytes. Here in this image, we can see that the osteoblasts are kind of near the outside of this bone matrix and are producing new bone matrix. They're secreting it. And that secreted bone matrix is just collagen or osteoid. And after this, we would initiate a process of calcification. And once calcification has occurred, once the bone matrix is hard, those osteoblasts get stuck and mature into osteocytes. Mature bone cells are stuck in the lacunae. They no longer divide. They're not mitotically active, but they still monitor and maintain the bone matrix. They still have a role. They act as stress or strain sensors for bone. They can also respond to those stressors or strains by essentially communicating information with osteoblasts or osteoclasts, because that tells essentially the bone what needs to happen. If something's happening in the body and we need more bone, we're going to communicate from osteocytes to osteoblasts. But if we need to break down bone, then we'll talk to the osteoclasts. This allows for bone remodeling to occur based on what's going on in your body and the stressors and strain that your bones are experiencing. Here we can see osteocytes stuck in their lacunae. So they're stuck in that calcified bone matrix. Here in the image on the bottom right, the bone matrix is the pink tissue. Let's not forget bone lining cells. These are flat cells on bone surfaces, and they're believed to also help maintain the matrix. So again, they work with osteocytes. And last but not least, we have osteoclasts. And again, they're derived from hematopoietic stem cells, not mesenchymal stem cells. They're actually huge, massive, giant, multinucleate cells, and they function in breakdown of bone, which is called bone resorption. They actually have kind of a ruffled area, which is really just to serve as an increased surface area space for enzyme release for increased degradation of bone. But that area with the ruffled border and where they actually indent on bone, kind of local depressions, that's called a resorption bay. They also, when they're done, help seal off the area from the surrounding matrix so it doesn't continue breaking down. So here's just a quick review. We can see an osteoblast, which can mature into an osteocyte, and they both share a different lineage in cell formation from the osteoclast, which comes from white blood cell lineage. Here we can see how big an osteoclast is compared to an osteocyte. The osteocyte here is labeled within its lacuna or its cup-like structure, And then the osteoclast is down at the bottom. We can see its many nuclei, its ruffled border, and that resorption bay where it's touching the bone matrix. A lot of times, osteoclasts, as they release calcium, have that calcium move into the blood, but they're oftentimes used just to remodel bone because of, again, stressors or strains on that bone. Here are some other views of osteoclasts and their local depressions that they create called resorption bays. Again, the process that they facilitate is bone resorption, and that's a normal part of bone growth, development, maintenance, and repair. We see a lot more of them in the endosteum than we do the periosteum. And the reason that you might want to eat away at bone is maybe we need increased calcium in the blood, or maybe because of stressors and strains, we need to remodel the bone. We want to get rid of some of the matrix before rebuilding it. So that's just one reason why you might use osteoclasts. Let's continue on and talk about the chemical composition of bone. We've already talked about osteoid, so that is going to be the organic component of bone. But there's also calcium phosphate salts. Those are the inorganic components. The osteoid is a soft organic component. It's created by the bone cells, like the osteoblasts, and that allows bone to resist tension or stretching. But bone would be not the same as we think of if it didn't have the calcium phosphate salts. You need those hard inorganic components, the mineral salts that together are called hydroxyapatite, in order to make bone hard and also to allow bone to resist compression. So the osteoid, the soft organic components, allows bone to resist tension or stretching, whereas the hard inorganic components, the calcium salts, allow bone to resist compression and make bone hard. So we need both components, the two components, in the right proportions in order to make healthy bone matrix. Bone is about half as strong as steel in resisting compression and as strong as steel in resisting tension. So this matrix we're building with both the organic and inorganic components is very strong. Again, the organic components are called osteoid, and the inorganic components together are called hydroxyapatite. The osteoid makes up probably about 1/3 of organic bone matrix, and it's secreted by the osteoblast. Again, osteoid is just mostly collagen, so it has a high tensile strength, and it's very flexible. It gives the bone great resilience, and we're going to see that those collagen molecules actually have proteins that like to bind to calcium. Again, the inorganic components collectively are called hydroxyapatites or hydroxyapatite salts, and they're made up primarily of calcium and phosphate crystals. And they make up 65% of bone by mass. So again, they're responsible for the hardness of bone and allow it to resist compression. Bone lasts long after death because of this really highly concentrated mineral composition that's made up of calcium and phosphate crystals. And that's why the skeletal remains can reveal information about ancient people, because they still exist thanks to this mineralization. So let's take another kind of overview of the bone matrix. So what makes up the extracellular matrix of bone? Again, that's 1/3 organic and 2/3 inorganic matrix. Organic component is osteoid, mainly collagen, made by osteoblasts, and the inorganic component is calcium phosphate salts. Really, it's two salts, calcium phosphate being the most common and calcium hydroxide also being present. And these two salts interact to form a compound that we call hydroxyapatite, which is, again, the inorganic component of the bone matrix. It's about 2/3 of that bone matrix. There's, of course, other minerals like magnesium and fluoride and sodium, but the calcium and phosphate, those crystals are paramount. And again, the inorganic component gives hardness and resistance to compression capabilities to the bone matrix, whereas the collagen fibers and the other organic materials are going to give the bone resilience and the ability to resist stretching and twisting. Let's continue on in the next video and look at the microscopic anatomy of bone. So let's start to put a lot of these words and phrases and definitions together. So make sure you watch the next part.